All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are diving headfirst into the core of Christian thought with the book of Romans straight from the King James Bible.
Right.
Now, we're not going for like a super academic lecture here, okay?
No.
Think of this as your express lane to grasping a book that's influenced centuries, of thought, and we're going to pinpoint those key insights together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got a ton of great info lined up, and our goal is to really distill Romans down to its essence, right?
Absolutely.
Like the historical setting, the big ideas it lays out, and how it's all put together.
Yeah.
We want to make this super important text, clear and impactful without getting lost in the weeds.
Yeah, right.
So first things first, the book's full title is The Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Romans. No question about the author, right? It's Paul the Apostle.
Right.
And what's interesting right away is that, unlike some of his other letters, Romans isn't just like reacting to a specific church's problems. It's more like a very deliberate theological argument,
Right.
almost a systematic presentation of what Christians believe.
Yeah, and that's a really key difference, actually.
Okay.
I mean, while Paul's other letters often tackle, specific issues or questions that popped up within a particular congregation, Romans kind of steps back and lays out these fundamental truths of Christianity in this really organized and logical way. It's like his definitive statement on the core of the gospel,
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So to set the scene, right, when and where was this written?
Right.
Our sources point to early spring, AD 57, during Paul's third missionary journey. It seems like he was kind of wrapping things up in the East,
Right.
getting ready for new adventures.
Exactly.
And what's really cool is trying to pinpoint his exact location. We know he was in charge of collecting money for the believers in Jerusalem. And Romans even mentions that the Macedonian and Achaean churches had already chipped in, right?
Right. That's a really important clue.
Yeah, and when you look at the timeline, plus what 1st and 2nd Corinthians say out the collection going on around 55 AD, it really seems like Romans was written after all that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the best guess is Corinth,
Yeah.
or maybe the nearby port of Cenchrea.
Right. Those are the most likely spots.
And there are even some personal shout-outs in the letter itself that seem to connect it to that region, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like little clues.
Yes, definitely.
Okay,
So the letter greets Phoebe, who was from Cenchrea. And some scholars think she might have even been the one who physically brought the letter to Rome.
Wow, really?
It's a possibility, yeah.
That's interesting.
And then there's Gaius, who Paul calls his host. He was probably in Corinth.
Oh, okay.
And there's also Erastus, who might have had some connections to Corinth, too.
Okay, so all these little breadcrumbs
Yeah, they all
help us place the letter very firmly in that time and place.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so who was Paul writing to?
Right.
The church in Rome.
The church in Rome, yep.
And they weren't all, from the same background, were they?
Oh, absolutely not.
What we've gathered tells us it was mostly Gentile believers,
Right.
but with a pretty sizable Jewish minority.
Yeah.
And that mix is actually super important for understanding some of the finer points in the letter.
Yes, absolutely.
It really is.
This mix of Jewish and Gentile Christians in Rome is key to understanding why Paul tackles certain topics the way he does.
Okay.
Particularly the relationship between the law of Moses and the new covenant that Jesus established.
Right, right.
He's essentially building a bridge, a theological bridge between these two groups, showing how God's plan of salvation includes both. Some scholars even wonder if maybe there was a shorter version of Romans that circulated later, maybe focusing on the first few chapters and aiming for a wider audience.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought.
Okay, so with all this background in mind,
Right.
What's the big takeaway you want our listener to get from this deep dive into Romans?
Yeah, that's a great question.
What's the one huge thing
Okay, so the main goal
I should be looking for as we break this down
is for you, the listener, to really grasp the revolutionary message at the heart of Romans.
Okay.
And that is God's righteousness, his plan for saving people.
Yeah.
It's not limited to one group.
Okay.
It's available to all humanity, Jew and Gentile alike, through faith.
All right, I like it. So it's for everyone.
It's for everyone.
It's about understanding how God has made a way for everyone to be right with him.
Right.
No matter their background or whether they followed specific laws.
Exactly. It's about that level playing field.
Okay, so let's get into the heart of it.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
Our sources highlight the major theme as God's plan of salvation and righteousness for all people, Jew and Gentile alike. Now, a lot of people might jump to justification by faith as the main point.
Yeah.
But it sounds like that's only one piece of a much bigger picture.
You're absolutely right.
Okay.
Justification by faith, the idea that we're declared righteous in God's eyes, not by what we do, but through believing in Jesus, that is absolutely essential to Romans.
Okay.
However, the overarching theme of righteousness from God, that's bigger and more inclusive.
Okay.
Think of it like this.
Sure.
Justification is the verdict. You're declared not guilty, but righteousness from God includes the whole process of how we become right with him.
Yeah.
It's the forgiveness at the start, the ongoing transformation in our lives, what theologians call sanctification, and the ultimate security of our salvation.
Yeah.
It's the whole package, God's complete restoration work.
So it's not just a one-time thing, it's a journey.
It's a journey, exactly.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, for our listener who wants the core message, quick and dirty, why did Paul even write this letter?
Right.
What were his big goals in talking to the Roman church?
Well, there were several key reasons, all kind of interwoven.
Okay.
First, Paul had wanted to visit Rome for a long time, and he saw it as a strategic base for his planned mission to Spain, taking the gospel even further west.
Wow.
This letter was his introduction.
Okay.
Laying out his theological background, the core of his message, to prepare the Roman church for his arrival and hopefully get their support for his future plans.
Okay, so it's like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I believe.
Exactly. It's like sending an advance team, but in letter form.
I like it, a theological advance team.
Exactly. Second, the church in Rome, they weren't founded by Paul or any of the other apostles.
Okay.
They hadn't gotten that direct foundational teaching.
Right.
From someone who had actually seen Jesus' ministry and resurrection.
Yeah, they were missing that firsthand account.
Right. And Paul saw this as a chance to give them a thorough understanding of the key principles of salvation. Yeah. Making sure they were grounded in solid doctrine.
Okay, so it's like giving them the owner's manual for their faith.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it.
And thirdly, and this is really important, given the makeup of the Roman church, Paul wanted to address this delicate, potentially divisive issue of Jewish and Gentile believers, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Like there were probably tensions, misunderstandings, because they came from different traditions and practices.
Yeah, different ways of doing things.
Especially around following the Mosaic law.
That was a big one.
Okay, so it wasn't just about, like, abstract theology. Right. It was about building unity, understanding within this diverse church community.
Absolutely. Paul needed to explain how both groups were now part of God's new covenant through Christ. Stressing that salvation comes through faith, not by sticking to Jewish rituals and laws.
So he's breaking down those barriers.
Yes. He's laying the groundwork for peaceful coexistence. And acceptance within the church.
Okay, so like no more us versus them.
Exactly.
Everyone's on the same team now.
On the same team, united by faith.
Okay, now you mentioned Paul was on his third missionary trip.
Yes.
What was going on in his own journey that made him decide to write this letter at this specific time?
Well, he was likely in Corinth, as we said.
Okay.
And our sources indicate he was pretty much done with his ministry in the Eastern Mediterranean. He felt a strong pull to go to Rome. Yeah. But before he could, he had this crucial task of delivering the money he'd collected.
Right, the financial collection.
Yes, from the Gentile churches in Macedonia and Achaia to the poor believers in Jerusalem.
Right, a big responsibility.
A big responsibility, and potentially risky for him.
Yeah, I bet.
So he was in a holding pattern, you could say, with this major task on his shoulders.
Yeah.
But his sights were already set on Rome.
Yeah, looking ahead.
And beyond.
Okay.
Since he couldn't travel to Rome right away, he used this time to write this incredibly detailed letter.
Wow.
It's almost like his theological manifesto, explaining the core of his gospel message and preparing the way for his eventual arrival.
It's like laying the groundwork.
Exactly. It was a strategic move to introduce himself and his teachings to a church he hadn't met yet.
I see.
Yeah, very strategic.
Okay, so we've got the when, the where, the why. Now let's get to the what.
Right, the content.
The actual content of the letter.
What's in it?
If our listener wants a roadmap of Romans, what are the main sections Paul covers in his argument?
Okay, so Paul starts by establishing a fundamental truth. The problem of sin, which is universal.
Oh, okay.
He very carefully shows that both Gentiles, who didn't have the Jewish law, and Jews, who did, are all under sin's power and fall short of God's glory.
So no one's exempt?
No one's exempt.
Okay.
He argues that no one can achieve righteousness through their own efforts or by perfectly following the law.
I see.
Essentially, Romans argues that your spiritual debt, if you will, can't be cleared by good deeds. You need God's payment through Jesus.
Okay, that's a powerful analogy.
It is.
So it's like everyone's starting from the same point.
Everyone starts from the same point.
In need of God's grace.
Exactly. Level playing field.
Okay. Then he unveils God's solution to this universal problem. Salvation.
Right.
It's freely offered through Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross.
Yes.
And it's received not by works, but through faith.
Through faith, absolutely.
Okay.
And to illustrate this, he uses the famous example of Abraham.
Right, yeah.
Showing that even before the law was given,
yeah,
Abraham was declared righteous because of his faith in God.
Okay, so faith has always been the key.
Faith has always been the key. That's right.
Okay.
And it doesn't end with just being declared righteous either.
Right, it goes beyond that, right?
Absolutely. Paul then explores what happens.
Okay.
The transformative consequences of this justification.
Okay.
He shows how being made right with God through faith brings us peace with him, gives us access to his grace, and fills us with hope for the future.
Right. So it affects everything.
It affects everything, yeah.
Okay.
He also talks about our freedom from the power of sin,
okay,
the condemnation of the law, and the incredible reality of new life in the Holy Spirit.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
It is, but it's the ongoing process of becoming more like Christ after we're declared righteous, what we call sanctification.
Right, sanctification.
This section really emphasizes the life-changing power of the gospel.
It's not just a legal thing, it's a personal transformation.
It's a transformation, exactly.
Okay, then he tackles what could be a sensitive question. For his Jewish audience, what about Israel's place in God's plan?
Yeah, that's a big one.
Okay, so how does he address that?
So Paul addresses this head on.
Okay.
He explains why it seems like Israel, God's chosen people, have mostly rejected the Messiah. He says this rejection isn't the final word.
Okay.
And that God still has a plan for Israel's salvation in the future.
Okay.
A time when all Israel will be saved.
Wow, so there's still hope.
There's still hope, absolutely.
Okay.
He points out that even now, there's a remnant of Jewish believers, and that the inclusion of Gentiles is part of God's mysterious plan.
Okay.
That's unfolding over time.
So it's a complex story, but God's still faithful.
Exactly. It's not about God abandoning his promises.
Yeah.
It's a more intricate picture of how redemption happens in history.
It's about how everyone fits into that bigger story.
Right. It's this big, beautiful tapestry.
Okay, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then the letter shifts from these deep theological truths to practical instruction for how Christians should live.
Right. It gets down to the nitty-gritty.
Okay.
Paul gives guidance on how believers should treat each other within the church.
Okay.
How they should interact with society and the government.
Right.
And how to handle disagreements and differences with love and unity.
So it's putting faith into action.
Exactly. Romans isn't just about understanding ideas. It's about how those ideas change our hearts and actions.
Okay, now our listeners always love those, like, surprising facts and deeper insights that make a topic stick with them. What are some special things about Romans that make it stand out in the New Testament?
Okay, so first and foremost, as we talked about earlier, its systematic nature is remarkable.
Okay.
Unlike many of Paul's other letters that deal with specific situations, Romans unfolds like a carefully constructed theological argument.
It's very intentional.
It's very intentional. It's his most complete and logically reasoned presentation of the gospel.
It's like he had a blueprint in his head.
It's like he had a blueprint and meticulously laid it out on paper.
Like a theological masterclass.
Exactly, in letter form.
I love it.
Second, the sheer range of theological themes he covers is just mind-blowing.
Okay, give us some examples.
Okay, think about it. Sin, death, salvation, grace, faith, righteousness, justification, sanctification, which, as we said, is that ongoing process of becoming more like Christ, then redemption, resurrection, and glorification.
Okay, that's a lot.
It is.
It covers so much ground.
It's a complete overview of the core beliefs of Christianity.
It's a huge amount of essential doctrine in one book.
A powerful concentration. Yeah.
Okay, what else makes it special?
Third, Paul doesn't just pull these ideas out of thin air.
Yeah.
He grounds his arguments firmly in the Old Testament scriptures, quotes extensively, particularly in chapters 9 through 11, to show that what he's teaching about salvation through faith and God's plan for both Jews and Gentiles, these aren't new ideas.
Okay.
They're rooted in God's promises and actions throughout history.
He's like, look, this isn't just me saying it. This is what the scriptures have been pointing to all along.
Exactly. He's showing the continuity, the fulfillment of God's plan.
And lastly, any other unique characteristics?
Yeah, we can't overlook Paul's deep and personal engagement with Israel.
Yeah, that's a major theme.
The way he wrestles with their current unbelief while still clinging to God's promises for their future. It reveals not just the theological point, but a deep emotional connection to his own people.
It's personal for him.
It's very personal. It highlights the tension between God's sovereignty and human responsibility in a really poignant way.
It's not just a detached discussion. It's his story, too.
Exactly. It's woven into his own identity.
Okay, now to give our listeners a clear structure to follow.
Can we do a quick flyover of the main sections of Romans?
Yeah, like a verbal outline.
Okay.
So the letter begins with an introduction.
Okay.
Where Paul establishes his authority as an apostle and expresses his desire to visit Rome.
Yeah, setting the stage.
And then, bam, he hits us with a central theme.
Okay.
The revelation of God's righteousness through faith.
Okay, so that's the headline.
The headline for the whole book.
All right, then what?
Then he moves into the unrighteousness of all people, meticulously demonstrating that both Gentiles and Jews are under sin and therefore need God's saving grace.
Everyone's in the same boat.
Everyone's in the same boat, no exceptions.
Okay.
This leads to the good news, the section on righteousness imputed, justification, where he explains how we're declared righteous not by our works, but through Christ and received by faith.
It's a gift, not something we earn.
Exactly, a gift.
Okay.
The example of Abraham is key here.
Right. And this new standing with God leads to the fruits of righteousness, the peace, hope, and joy that come from being justified.
So we see the immediate benefits.
The immediate benefits, yeah.
Okay.
Then Paul contrasts humanity's unrighteousness with God's gift of righteousness, emphasizing the transformative power of God's grace.
Grace over works.
Grace over works, yes.
Okay.
And then he dives deep into righteousness imparted, sanctification, exploring how we experience freedom from sin's tyranny, freedom from the law's condemnation, and the empowering reality of life and the Holy Spirit.
So this is where the rubber meets the road.
It is.
It's about how our lives actually change.
Exactly, how we're transformed to reflect our new identity in Christ.
Right. It's more than just a legal declaration.
It's an inward transformation.
Okay. Then in chapters 9 through 11, things get really interesting.
Yeah, those are some dense chapters.
Okay.
Paul grapples with God's righteousness vindicated, the justice of his way with Israel. He tackles their current rejection of Christ, explaining that it's not the whole story, and revealing God's ultimate purpose of mercy for both Jews and Gentiles.
It's a complex and often debated part of the letter.
Very much so, yeah. The letter shifts to practical application.
Okay.
The section Righteousness Practiced, offering guidance for life in the church and the world and among weak and strong Christians.
So it's about how we live out our faith.
Exactly, faith in action.
I like it.
And finally, the letter wraps up with a conclusion that includes personal greetings, commendations, and a powerful doxology.
Right.
A final expression of praise to God for his amazing plan.
What a journey. From theological foundations to everyday living.
It's a testament to Paul's understanding of God's saving work.
Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into Romans, What are the essential things you want our listener to remember?
Okay, so the main takeaway is that God's righteousness isn't something we earn. It's a free gift to everyone.
Okay.
Jew and Gentile alike.
Yeah.
Through faith in Jesus Christ.
Okay.
We explored the historical context. Paul writing around AD 57 to the church in Rome.
Right. A very diverse group.
A diverse group, yeah.
Okay.
And we saw his different purposes.
Yeah.
To introduce himself,
yeah.
lay out his theological beliefs,
okay.
and promote unity between different groups of believers.
And it's not just about that initial acceptance of God's grace.
Right.
It's about how that grace impacts our lives and relationships.
Exactly. It's ongoing.
Okay.
We also highlighted the letter's systematic argument, its comprehensive treatment of key Christian doctrines, its grounding in the Old Testament, and Paul's deep concern for his own people, Israel.
Okay.
It's a book that remains foundational for understanding Christian theology and the journey of faith.
So as our listeners think about all this, how might these ancient themes of sin, salvation offered through grace, and the complex relationships within a community of faith speak to the challenges and opportunities they face today?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the divisions and misunderstandings we still see, even within religious groups.
Yeah.
Paul's message of everyone needing God's grace.
Okay.
And the call for unity built on that shared grace.
Yeah.
That's still so relevant today.
It is.
Consider how the idea that our standing before God is a gift, not something we achieve, might reshape your sense of worth and how you relate to others.
It's a game changer.
It really is.
It forces us to look at our own biases and see what truly bridges the gaps between people.
That's exactly what brings us together.
Okay, so for our final thought, let's leave you with this. As you ponder the way Romans explores God's unwavering justice in addressing sin and his boundless mercy in offering salvation through faith, how does that understanding shape your view of the complexities and the potential for hope in our world today?
That's a big question.
It is.
And how might a deeper dive into this foundational book
enrich your own spiritual walk and your understanding of God's plan for humanity? It's a journey worth taking.
Absolutely. It's an adventure.
Okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
On The Deep Dive.
Yeah, it's been great.